Welcome to another video on building an e-commerce with Vue for building user interface on the browser, Nuxt to streamline the web development process, Strapi to easily manage your content and distribute it using a admin panel so editors can do that, meaning any non-technical user, non-tech savvy, GraphQL to optimize our something called underfetching and overfetching. Well, in other words, what it does is to optimize is the amount of requests that we have to make to our servers and reduce the payload by only fetch relevant data from the server and show that on the client. Docker, so we can containerize our applications and we deploy that anywhere. Stripe to integrate payment solutions, payment options, and deploy on Amazon EC2, which is one of the AWS service that Amazon provides, right? This is a highly optimized virtual machine that contains a highly optimized hypervisor for that bare bone. So again, the goal of this is to see how feasible, fast, scalable is to create and maintain this kind of application. And the way to do that is, well, first following is the methodology, like the design, to first look at what are the component UI library that we're going to use for this case, as well as the build step, okay, for the frontend and the backend, and then the test or environment, so we can ultimately deploy. But before that, okay, we need to understand several concepts. First, on the design aspect here, once I conduct a research to identify this UI component library, we pick VueStick for that, because it provides a lot of components that are responsive. So it will work on desktop and on mobile, great. And we look also at some of the Nuxt plugins that they provide. So for example, with Strapi and Stripe, even though they don't have a Nuxt 3 model, but we can use, for our example, this car integration that they provide. So the time estimated is less than 24 hours. This might be a little bit longer, especially because here I am improving my communication skills as well as the analytic, technical, and also my sales pitch. Okay, so when it comes to the build step, first we start with the backend, and that is look at how can we set up a Strapi backend, and after all, Strapi, it all start as an easy way to help bootstrap your API, but now grow into this headless CMS, this open source headless CMS that allows developers to easily choose whatever favorite tool they want, and for editors, so they can manage and distribute their content through their admin panel. So since Strapi follow is the convention from the software engineer, which is a plugin based system, meaning that we can extend our API as well as the admin. And it also comes with a built-in user systems to manage what end users or administrators have access to. So I set up Strapi, then I define is the most common data structure on our e-commerce, okay, whether it's product, reviews, order list, and then populate that with mock data in our admin, which is kind of time-consuming operation. And then again, to streamline the and to optimize our application, network optimizations specifically for reduce the amount of requests that we have to hit on the server and only fetch relevant data from the server to the client. We rely on GraphQL, and luckily for us, it contains a plugin that by default it has a Apollo server, and Apollo is an implementation of the GraphQL specifications where they have is the client and the server among other advanced features. So it acts as this data layer between your mother web applications and the cloud. Okay, and besides the Apollo server, it also has something called shadow crew, which is automatically generate the creation of the queries, mutations, types, resolvers based on any model that we define on the admin panel. So just for demo purpose, okay, I will run the server here so you can see that I'm actually running the server. Let me change this here. E-commerce. There you got it. Okay, and here we say, hey, performing npm, please run the server. What is the server command here? Is npm run develop. Okay, I'm using performing npm because what it does is to catch a local version of all of our dependencies, so it runs that fast. And there we got it. Now our local server here is here. The server is running successfully. Okay. To access the server and to manage your project. So if I want to manage my project here, is through admin here. Okay, is through admin here. That's right. And I don't know what is the what was the password here. Oh crap, what was the password here? And there you got it. It's this. All right. Okay, so in here in our admin panel we have is the content manager, where we already define is the row, aka we populate is the data structure or the types here. Okay, and on the content type builder like this is where we define is the structure, the data structure, or the different primitives, the data types. So whether it's string, number, boolean, relationships between different models. So yeah, you were not able to see that. Now that you can see is here. So you got the content type builder, where we define is our data structure here, and the content managers when we populate that. Okay, cool. Because now after I done that, okay, I thought I would need to install an Apollo server with Strapi, but there is no need for that. And also to define some basic resolvers. There is no need for that. And then now I'm looking at the front end. And to understand why we're using Nuxt, okay? Nuxt aims to improve the developer experience as well as the end users, meaning that the goal of Nuxt is to deliver an optimized user experience by providing several optimization techniques like tree shaking, code splitting, lean prefetching, several rendering strategies, client-side rendering, server-side rendering, incremental server-side rendering, static side generation, and SEO and web vitals, a set of metrics that represents the different facets of the user experience. It's measurable and it reflects the real world experience according to their website, webvitals.dev, web.dev/vitals, right, from Google. And this current set of metrics, which will evolve over time, in 2020 it focused on three aspects of the user experience: the loading, the interactivity, and the visual stability. The loading, the large contentful pane, the interactivity is the first input delay, and the visual stability with the content, with the cumulative layout shift. Okay, so to get a good understanding and to ensure that we're hitting the recommended target for most of our users, a good result is a 75 percentile or 75th percentile of page load segmented across mobile and desktop. Okay, and we also have tools to test that on the field, like page speed insights and lab data like Lighthouse, right? So by leveraging the server-side rendering with ES formats and optimization image, Nuxt websites are indexable by search engine while giving the feeling of an app to the end users. So in other words, one of the first goals of Nuxt is to deliver an optimized user experience by providing is several optimization techniques, rendering strategies, SEO, and web vitals. Okay, and when it comes to developers, well, it comes with a plug and play, meaning that it provides a very intuitive directory structure. Okay, it comes with automations for most of the common repetitive tasks like minification, code splitting, typings, bundling for production, and more. And that includes such as data fetching, state management, meta tags helpers, route guards, cookies, error handling, bundle analyzers, and a community of web builders. And then I look at the introduction. Okay, so Nuxt particularly. Okay, so once I look what is the goal of Nuxt, which is deliver this optimized user experience, as well as improve the developer experience with a web community. Now, to understand what Nuxt does, well, it allows you to build performance, type-safe, full production-grade, full-stack applications or websites. And you can enjoy the benefit of using hot motor reload and a performant production server-side rendering by default. So Nuxt has no vendor lock-in and allow you to deploy your application anywhere, even to the edge. As long as the hosting provides you a JavaScript environment, you can deploy your code there. Okay, so this is the introduction of Nuxt, and well, it comes with automations and conventions like the file-based routing, code splitting, server-side rendering out of the box, data fetching utilities, zero config TypeScript, and configure build tools. Okay, and now for the server-side rendering, which is another topic that Nuxt provide. Okay, it comes with, again, this automation and convention for developers, server-side rendering, which things the rendering happens on the server. Now it serves that to the browser and the content expressor, so it improves the SEO because now the content is in there and web crawlers can easily index your application or your website, as well as improve the performance for low power device, because now there is no need to download and parse large chunk of JavaScript. Better accessibility since the content is in there. Now accessibility technologies such as screen reader or any other assisted technologies allow users to access your website much more easily, easier catching, because you can tell the server which route you can or you might want to catch, those critical applications that you want to catch, or those critical routes that you want to catch to serve to your end users, your users much more faster. Let's say, for example, homepage, right? Or if you have an e-commerce, which is in our case, the home e-commerce, right? The server engine, which this is something interesting. Nuxt Server Engine Nitro unlocks new full stack capabilities. So in development, we have rollup and Node.js worker, so we can seize and harness the power of the multi-core using JavaScript thanks to Node.js workers. Okay, and on production, Nuxt build your app and the server in a universal .output, which is already minified with and removed from Node.js dependency, except the polyfills, and you can deploy that output in any JavaScript in any supporting JavaScript. So from Node, Dino, serverless, workers, edge side caching, which is great, and also purely static. You know, this is something great, completely. So then we have the production ready. Okay, then we have the production ready. Yep. Then we have the production ready. Well, after all, again, as we mentioned earlier, well, Nuxt Nitro builds your app in the server into this universal output, which is already light, minified, and remove the Node.js dependency. So you can deploy this on any JavaScript supporting system. It's modular, so you can extend its different Nuxt plugins to that. And then I look at the architecture here. Okay, so with the architecture, the whole point is to understand each one of those core package, uh, such as the core engine, meaning anytime when we talk about an engine in software, it's the heart of the application that provide a set of capability that are exclusively for that functionality. When you talk about server engine, is this set is the heart of is that as a software is the heart of the software application, the server that provides a set of capability to facilitate the task of a server. Okay, and how we interact with that. So in this case, with the core engine, Nuxt, well, is to facilitate is how do we deliver an optimized experience to users while improving the developer experience as well as the web community support all of this work. So we have the core engine with Nuxt, right? And then the bundlers, whether it's with Webpack or Vite, the command line interface with Nuxt, so you can easily generate a lot of the Nuxt features, whether it's component, plugins, among others. The server engine, Nitro, the development kit, okay, so to extend the Nuxt application with plugins, and Nuxt to bridge so we can use the new advancement or some of the new features from Nuxt 3 in Nuxt 2 application. So something that they mentioned, which is recommended that you read each concept to have a full vision of Nuxt capabilities and the scope of each package. Okay. So once I look at this, okay, this introduction, that is to describe what Nuxt is, as well as some of the features that it provides to us, like automation and conventions, server-side rendering, the need of the server engine, the production ready, is modular, and analyzes the architecture with several, or analyze the architecture of Nuxt, which is the core engine, the bundlers, whether it's Webpack or Vite, the command line with Nuxt, the server engine with Nitro, the development kit with Nuxt kit, and the Nuxt 2 bridge for that. So now understanding this, or to have a full vision of what Nuxt allows to do, what Nuxt brings us. So what Nuxt bring to the table. Okay. So what Nuxt bring to the table. Okay. Then I look at the key concept of this. Okay. Key concept that when you look at Nuxt docs, right? So when I look at the Nuxt docs here, so this is about the key concept, right? Like the auto imports, where now Nuxt auto imports are helper functions, composables, and Vue APIs, as well as based on the directory structures, components, composables, and plugins. Contrary to classic global declarations, Nuxt preserve typings, ID completion, and hints. Okay, there are also something important to understand when it comes to this auto import, especially when you integrate that with Vue and Nuxt. Again, when you want to work with this auto composable, because Vue needs to track or something that is mentioned here, when you're using the built-in composition API composables provided by Vue and Nuxt, be aware that many of them rely on being called in the right context. Okay, especially when you're building. So when you're using is the built-in composition composables provided by Nuxt and Vue. So be aware of many of them rely on being called in the right context. So during a component lifecycle, okay. So during a component lifecycle, Vue tracks the temporary instance of the current component, and similar Nuxt track a temporary instance of the Nuxt app via global variable, and then unset it in the same tick. This is essential when server-side rendering, both to avoid cross-request state pollution, aka leaking a shared reference between two users, and avoid leakage between different components. So the whole point of this is of understanding this during a component lifecycle, because during a component lifecycle, Vue tracks temporary instance of the current component, and Nuxt do the same, but for temporary instance of the Nuxt app, okay, via global variables. So this is essential with server-side rendering, both to avoid leaking shared reference between two users or two different Nuxt apps, and avoid leaking between different components. Okay, and this is one of the reasons that you must use. Okay, so you must use them synchronously. That is, you cannot use await before calling a composables except within script setup. Okay, you must use this. You must use them. You must use this Vue or Nuxt composable synchronously. That is, you cannot use await before calling a composable except script setup block with the setup function of a component declared with the find Nuxt component in the find Nuxt plugin or in the find Nuxt route mutable, where we perform a transform to keep the synchronous context even after the await. If you get an error message like Nuxt instance is unavailable, then it probably means you're calling a Nuxt composable in the wrong place in the Vue or Nuxt lifecycle. Okay. Interesting. So, in other words, auto imports are something very handy, especially for Vue or Nuxt composables, such as compositions APIs, helper functions for components, composables, and helper function composables on Vue APIs, and for Nuxt, for on components, composables, and plugins. So behind the scene is automatically register all of those components. Okay, so contrary to classic global declaration, Nuxt preserve the typings, ID completion, and hints. But when it comes to use Vue and Nuxt composable, you must be aware that using in the right context. Okay, using in the right context, meaning you must use them synchronously, something that they mention here. Okay, meaning that you should use them synchronously. Okay, that means that with very few exceptions, you cannot use them outside a Nuxt plugin, Nuxt route middleware, or Vue setup functions. So you can use the Vue and Nuxt composables, and that makes a lot of sense. You can use with few exceptions. Okay, with few exceptions, you can use Vue and Nuxt composables, and for Vue is the Vue APIs, helper function, and composable functions. And with Nuxt, well, uh, the the composables, the plugins, as well as this Nuxt composable functions. Okay. All right. All right. So, meaning that you cannot use them outside of a Nuxt plugin, Nuxt route middleware, or Vue setup functions. On top of that, you must use them synchronously. So that is, you cannot use a wait before calling a composable, except with script setup block. With the setup function of composable declared with define Nuxt composable. Within the setup function of a component declared with define Nuxt components in define Nuxt plugin or in define Nuxt route middleware, where we perform a transform to keep the synchronous context even after the await. If you get an error message like Nuxt instance is unavailable, then it probably means you're calling a Nuxt composable in the wrong place in Vue or Nuxt lifecycle. Okay. Example of breaking code, you must call this inside of the composable. Okay, and then talk about the directory-based out imports, components, composable utils, explicit imports, disable auto imports. Interesting. Disable auto imports. Okay. The other concept is with Vue. So they choose Vue first by the reactivity model when a change where a change in data automatically triggers a change in the interface. So they choose Vue by the reactivity model. A change in the data automatically trigger a change in the interface. Again, we're building is user interface. So the components-based templating, so while keeping HTML as the common language of the web, enables intuitive pattern to keep your interface consistent and yet powerful. And this is one of the things why I love Vue after all. Okay, it keep the HTML as a common language. Okay, and enables intuitive pattern to keep your interface consistent and powerful. So the first is the reactivity model of Vue. A data change on the a change in the data automatically triggers a change in the interface. The component-based templating, so while keeping the HTML as the common language, and provides patterns to keep your interface consistent and powerful. And from small project to large web applications, Vue keeps performing well at scale to ensure that your application keeps delivering value to your users. This is for the developers, the holy grail, so far. So for developers, this is the holy grail. Yeah, complete. So for developers, this is the holy grail. So, so after I look at the importance of the key concept of the out import, again, by default, Nuxt out import is the Vue and Nuxt composables. For Vue is the composable, the helper function, and the Vue APIs. For the Nuxt is the components, the composables, as well as Nuxt specific composables like data fetchings, meta helpers, meta tag helpers, cookie, route guards, among others. And you also need to be careful of when you're going to use these Nuxt and Vue composables. You must be aware that they must be used in a particular context. And the reason why another key concept is Vue development, and they choose that for their reactivity model. A change in the data automatically triggers a change on the in the interface. The components templating, okay, the component based templating, keeping the HTMLs while providing is a powerful patterns to make your interface consistent. And for small and large projects, Vue keeps performance well at scale. Okay, so that's actually great. Okay, so yeah, so that's actually great. This is another key concept here. The outer import. Exactly, the outer imports for this. The composables, okay, as well as the explicit export and the disable out imports. And here is the reason why they go with, okay, and the reason why they go with Vue, right? Mm-hmm. Complete. And the reason why they go with Vue, right? Mm-hmm. So the reason why they choose Vue is by the reactivity model, the component space templating, and the scalability and performance for small and large web applications. And then he's explaining is here about the single file components. That's right, the components auto imports. Every Vue component is creating in components directory of a Nuxt project will be available in your project without having to import it. If a component is not used anywhere, your project production code will not include it. Vue router. Most applications need multiple pages and a way to navigate between them. This is called routing. Nuxt use a page directory naming conventions to directly create routes mapped to your files using the official Vue router library. And then you got an example, open on Stack Bliss, open on Code Sandbox. And the difference with Nuxt and Vue 2, right? Better performance, composition API, and TypeScript support. Faster rendering. You got this. This is the difference. I think this is something important as well. Okay. So the difference between Nuxt 2 and Vue 2 is better performance, composition API, and TypeScript support. Faster rendering because now the entire Vue DOM has been rewritten from the ground up. Smaller bundler and the composition API, as well as the TypeScript support. And now, when it comes to the rendering mode, okay, a very, very, very important topic here is to understand this. All right, okay. So now that I go from our imports, again, we're talking about key concept. So the auto import, okay. Vue and Nuxt provide auto imports for Vue APIs for Vue APIs, helpers, and compositions. For Nuxt, things like auto import Nuxt components or components, composables, plugins, among other Nuxt composable features. It is very important to know when you can use these composables, because otherwise you may get an error, or you will get an error for that. Okay, and then I look at the Vue. The reason why they go with Vue is the reactivity models. A change in data automatically triggers change on the interface. The components-based templating, meaning that while keeping the HTML as the common language of the web, and provide common pattern to make your interface consistent and powerful, and scalability and optimizations, because Vue has provide and show that for small and large scale app, it is very, very, it is good. It is good. It is good. All right. And another key concept is the rendering mode. Something that we mentioned early when we talk about the goal of Nuxt, delivering an optimized user experience. And one of them is, besides to provide several optimization techniques, several rendering strategy, SEO, and Web Vitals, here we're looking is the rendering modes. Okay. Now, we're quite familiar of the client and server side rendering. But in any case, let's go to make a quick recap. Okay. So rendering modes, both the browser and the server can interpret JavaScript code to render Vue. Great. Okay. Nice, by the way. Nice. So the browser and the server can interpret JavaScript codes to render Vue components into HTML elements. Perfect. Perfect. Okay. So the servers can interpret JavaScript codes to render Vue.js components into HTML elements, and the browser can do that as well. Okay. So the browser and the server can interpret JavaScript code to render Vue components into HTML elements, and this step is called rendering. Okay, so the interpretation of JavaScript codes, whether from the browser and the server of Vue.js components into HTML, this process is called rendering. So Nuxt supports both for the client side or the browser and universal rendering. The two approaches have pros and cons that we will cover in this section. Okay, so we're slowly getting into the juicy part. Okay, so we're slowly getting into the good stuff. All right. Mm-hmm. So we're slowly getting into the good stuff. Mm-hmm. Okay. So because the process of rendering is, in the case of Nuxt, okay, so the browser and the server both can interpret JavaScript code to render Vue.js components into HTML, and this process is rendering. Okay, so rendering here in this context is that the browser and the server can interpret JavaScript codes to render Vue components into HTML, because after all, that's what the browser understands, HTML. Okay, so Nuxt provides and supports both for the client and universal rendering. Two approaches have pros and cons that we will cover in this section. So the client side only rendering, so out of the box, a traditional Vue.js application is rendering in the browser or the client. That's right. A traditional Vue.js application is rendered on the browser. So Vue generates HTML element after the browser downloads and parses all the JavaScript codes containing the instruction to create the current interface. Okay, so in a traditional Vue.js applications, uh, or out of the box, a traditional Vue.js application is rendering on the browser. Exactly. Or aka a single page application or client side rendering. Okay. A traditional Vue.js application is rendering in the browser. So then Vue generates HTML element after the browser downloads and parses all the JavaScript codes containing the instruction to create a current interface. So to understand this, what happened here is that on the client side, in a traditional Vue.js application, is rendering on the browser, okay, or the client. So Vue generates the HTML, okay. So once the browser downloads the JavaScript, the JavaScript files contain the Vue framework, okay. So Vue will generate is the HTML after the browser downloads and parses all the JavaScript code containing the instructions to create the current interface, which that makes sense. So the browser downloads an empty HTML document, then the browser downloads and runs the JavaScript codes, and then the app is now rendering an interactive. Okay, so that's the series of steps. First, the browser gets an empty HTML document. Then he downloads and runs or parse all the JavaScript code, and ultimately the app is now rendering and is interactive. Okay, if you compare this with the Web Vitals, which analyze the different step or different facet of the user experience, the loading, the interactivity, and the visual stability. Okay, so now we're talking about is the loading aspect and the interactivity. Okay, so again, this is exactly what happened here when we talk about the rendering modes. Okay, The browser and the server, both of them can understand JavaScript to render Vue.js components into HTML documents or into HTML elements. Okay, and this step is called rendering. And Nuxt support both the client side and universal rendering. Okay, so Nuxt support both client side and universal rendering. So Nuxt support both client side and universal rendering. Okay, so Nuxt supports both client side and universal rendering, and the two have different pros and cons. Okay, so the client side rendering in a traditional Vue.js application, the uh, in a traditional Vue.js application, this is rendering on the browser, meaning that the Vue.js generates the HTML elements. Okay, the Vue.js generates the HTML element after the browser downloads and parses all the JavaScript code containing the instructions to create the interface. Makes sense? Okay, so at the first step, the browser downloads an empty HTML document. Then the browser downloads and runs JavaScript. So ultimately, the app is now rendering and fully interactive. So while this technique allows building complex and dynamic UIs with smooth page transition, it has different pros and cons. So the pros is that developing speed, okay? So we don't have to worry about the server compatibility of the code. For example, by using browser-only APIs like the window objects. Okay, since we are entirely working on the client side, we don't have to worry about the server. That's one of the pros. So since we are working entirely on the client, we don't have to worry about the server. So then it's cheaper because running a server adds cost to infrastructure, as you will need to run on a platform that supports JavaScript. We can host client-only applications on any static server with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. Okay, it is cheaper because now there is no need to deploy your app on a server. You will need to run on a platform that supports JavaScript, which is a client, right? So you can host clients-only applications on any static web server with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript file. You can host any application, okay? So we can host client-only applications on any static server with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript file. And it works offline because the code entirely runs in the browser. You can nicely keep working while the internet is unavailable. So the con is performance, because now the user have to wait for the entire web app is downloaded and runs. Okay, you're depending on the network for the download part and the user device for parsing and execution. So this can take sometimes and impact user experience. So that's one of the cons of the client-side routing, the performance, because the user have to wait for the browser to download and parse your JavaScript code before it can render and before the app is rendering and be interactive. Okay, so it impacting the user experience. And the other is search engine optimization. Since now the content is not present, web crawlers have no idea, and they don't need to wait for, and they won't wait for your interface to be fully rendered on the first try, right? So the content will take more time to show and updates in search result page with prior client-side rendering. So there is a penalty here with that. So examples of client-side rendering is a good choice for heavily interactive web applications that don't need indexing or whose users visit frequently. Okay, it can leverage browser caching to skip the download phase on subsequent visits, so such as SaaS back office applications or online games, right? This is one of the most common use case of this client-side rendering, right? So when your app, so when you don't need to index your application, when you don't need to indexing or your or whose users visit frequently, such as the SaaS, back office applications, or online games. Okay, and then you have is the universal rendering. Then you have is the universal rendering. Okay, so when the browser requests a URL with universal client side and server side, that's the reason why they call universal rendering in this context. Okay, the server returns a fully rendered HTML page to the browser. Whether the page has been generated in advance and cached or is rendering on the fly, at some point Nuxt has to run the JavaScript Vue.js code in the server environment, producing an HTML document. So users immediately get the content of our applications contrary to the client-side rendering. And this step is similar to the traditional server-side rendering performed by PHP or Ruby applications. To not lose the benefit of the client-side rendering methods, such as dynamic interface and page transitions, the clients load the JavaScript code that's run on the server in the background once the HTML document has been downloaded. Okay, so once the HTML document has been downloaded, the client loads the JavaScript that runs on the server, and the browser interprets it again, hence universal, and Vue.js takes control of the document and enables interactivity. Making static page interactions in the browser is called hydration. Universal rendering allows a Nuxt application to provide quick page load time while preserving the benefit of client-side rendering. Furthermore, as the content is already present in the HTML document, crawlers can index it without overheat. The full HTML is sent to the browser and rendered. Visitors can read, scroll, and click on links. Browser downloads and run the JS in background. Hydration step is complete and the app is fully interactive. So pros, performance and search engine optimizations, the country's development constraint. The server and browser environment don't provide the same API, and it can be tricky to write code that runs on both sides seamlessly. Unfortunately, Nuxt provides guidelines and specific variables to help you determine where a piece of code is executed. Cost. A server needs to be running in order to render page on the fly. This adds a monthly cost like any traditional server. However, the server costs are highly reduced thanks to universal rendering, with the browser taking over on the client-side render. So example of this universal rendering are blocks. Universal rendering is very versatile and can fit almost any use case, and is especially appropriate for any content-oriented website. Blogs, marketing website, portfolios, e-commerce sites, and marketplace. Summary: client-side and universal rendering are different strategies to display an interface in a browser. Different strategy to display an interface in a browser. By default, Nuxt uses universal rendering to provide better user experience and performance, and to optimize search engine indexing. But you can switch rendering modes in one line configuration. Mm, what? Okay, what? Anyway, new rendering pattern in Nuxt 3. In most cases, universal rendering as performing in Nuxt 2 offers a good user and developer experience. However, Nuxt 3 takes universal rendering a step further by introducing hybrid rendering and edge-side rendering. Hybrid rendering and edge-side rendering. Hybrid rendering is allow you to define caching rules per route using route roles and decide how the server should respond to a new request on a given URL. Rendering on CDN edge workers. Traditionally, server-side and universal rendering was only possible using Node.js. Nuxt 3 takes into another level by directly rendering code in CDN edge workers, reducing latency and cost. Nitro is the new server engine that powers Nuxt 3. It offers cross-platform support for Node.js, Deno, workers, and more. Nitro's design is platform agnostic and allows rendering a Nuxt application at the edge, closer to your users, allowing replication and further optimizations. And route rules are still under active development and subject to change. So it's better to not use this. So no, it's better to not use it. Example, route rules block. So you can indicate that static page generation on demand revalidates in the background. Static page generation on demand once. Static true. Set custom header matching pattern. Cache control max age. Render this route with single page. Exact. Render this route with single page. Add course headers to this array. Add redirect headers all page. Interesting. Interesting. Very, very interesting. And then you have the server engine, which is this. Nuxt 3 is powered by a new server engine Nitro. Cross-platform support for Node.js browser, service and worker and more. Serverless support out of the box. API route support. Automatic code splitting and async load chunk. Lazy loading. Hybrid mode for static and serverless sites. Development server with hot motor reloading. And then you got an API layer. Server API endpoints and middlewares are added by Nitro that internally use H3. H3 is this lightweight minimal HTTP framework built for high performance and portability. In contributors. Yeah, there was always one developer that do the vast majority of the work. There's always one developer that brings the entire ecosystem, man. No, because he loves that. He enjoys to do that. Volta, supercharged GitHub experience. Mm, yeah, some sort of notion. Stripe climbing. Mhm. Direct API calls, type API routes, standalone server, and then the models. Exploring Nuxt model here, the models property, ES model. What is native ESM? And TypeScript. Will be global and including every main in every page. Okay. So, okay. So, that'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye bye.